the Dean of the College of Health and Human Sciences. And this panel is a panel of people identifying as men who will address the absolute necessity and value of inclusivity in science. The panel includes men who can speak to this topic from positions across academia, schools, and industry. I want to welcome all of them. We'll do introductions in a minute, but I also want to welcome all of you. And I am so pleased to see such a broad audience. It's been fun to watch the numbers tick up. And looking at who's registered, we have faculty, staff, students, community members. I know earlier and in another session, there are students from elementary, junior, and senior high schools here as well, and they've submitted some questions we might hear later. But I want to welcome all of you as well. So I want to give just a little bit of overview of why this is called a manel. So the idea for this came from the gauntlet that was thrown by Francis Collins, the director of the National Institutes of Health, who observed that scientific panels are often all men, thus the term manel instead of panel. And he's since refused to participate unless women are included and the panels are more inclusive. So the challenge to our manel today is to learn from men who've committed to inclusivity, who are mentors of women, who have learned from women, and who are mentoring other men to promote women in science. So I'm super looking forward to our conversation today and learning from their experiences, hearing from them, and having your questions answered as well. So just for a little bit of housekeeping for the flow of today's manel, we'll start with introductions. We'll spend some time with conversation among the panelists, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions. But I want to note that you can post your questions at any time during the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat. And some of you may have indeed submitted questions ahead of time, and so we'll get to try and get to some of those as well. But first, it's my privilege to introduce our panel. So I'll call your name. We're in Zoom etiquette now, so I'll call your name and ask you to briefly introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and most importantly, why you committed to be on this panel. So Ed Hoover, we'll start with you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ed Hoover. I'm a professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine, Biomedical Sciences, and Microbiology, Immunology, Pathology, lots of ologies. I'm here because I'm totally convinced that integrating women and men equally will make a better world. I'm totally sure of one thing, that's it.
Thank you, Ed. Let's go to Gregg Dean.
Hi, I'm the head of the Department of Microbiology, Immunology, and Pathology. And really, this is a great opportunity for me to support really what's a tradition and a culture of supporting women that exists in our department. And this is largely due to the pioneering efforts and leadership of Carol Blair. And I really want to call her out for the impact that she's had on the culture of the department from the time that she was department head and throughout her time in the department. And you know, that really leads us to where we are today as a department, where we have so many students and staff and faculty who are actively engaged in WiSCI, and including Candy Mathiasen, who's faculty member in the department. So I'm here to continue my practice really of being an effective ally.
Thank you, Gregg. Morris Price.
Good afternoon. I'm Morris Price, proudly serving as the Vice President of City Year Denver, an AmeriCorps program. I'm proud Denver Public School alum and CSU alum, and proudly serve on the CSU Foundation Board. I'm here because I have benefited from the mentorship of women, not to mention my twin sister, who's a 35-year veteran aerospace engineer. I grew up believing that women were better at math and science and men were better at arts and humanities. So I'm always surprised when people see the opposite. So to take what they have given to me, the women who've mentored me and led me, and return that favor back to mostly men who need to have their eyes opened up a little more so than women.
Thank you, Morris. Gilbert John.
Oh, good afternoon. Let me begin by just a little personal background. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. married 31 years, have two beautiful daughters who are young women now, in professions of working for a law firm and assistant professor at the University of Arizona. So I've got that background, and my current position at Colorado State is Assistant Dean for Research in the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. So I think this is really important. I'm always happy to participate. I know when I was faculty at Oklahoma State, before coming back here, I've had some wonderful women come through my lab, and they're doing very well. They're very successful, and I'm really always excited to be part of that. And, you know, with my daughters, always taught them to certainly tackle this world because there's a lot of challenges. So I've had that background. I've always been part of who I am. And then lastly, being Navajo, part of our culture, we put women up on the pedestal in terms of having a really important role in our life, in terms of ownership, things like that. So it's always been part of who I am, and probably always will be. You don't have to work too hard at it.
Thank you, Gilbert. Rick Blas?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the Manel panel. I am also a proud alum of CSU and the Poudre School District, and I currently am a high school science teacher at the Fort Collins High School. And I'm kind of struggling here because my wife is on this chat because she's the communications director for the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Science, and I feel like George Costanza right now, and my two worlds are colliding. So I'm committed to be on this Manel because at the high school level, I see how strong young women are in the sciences. And then when I look at the data as they trickle off, as they get into secondary higher education and employment, it just, it kills me. So I just want to ensure that we change that trend.
Thank you, Rick. Could not agree more. Scott Nielsen?
Hey, everybody. My name's Scott Nielsen. I'm the assistant superintendent. I get to oversee all the secondary schools here in Poudre School District. I've been in Poudre School District 25 years. I spent a lot of time in middle school as a teacher and an administrator, and I've been in this role 5 years. I committed to this panel because for me, it's been a passion as long as I've been in education. And when I was thinking about influential women for me, one, I was raised by a single mom who was a teacher, so guided me in the path I've been on. But after that, my stepmom was an engineer who used to talk about all the coursework she did, being the only woman in the courses she was in as a computer scientist. And then my wife, who we've been married 23 years, is a strong engineer who pushes every day to make sure that I am helping to create the conditions for my 7th grade daughter so that she can see the sky, the doors are open to be whatever, do whatever she wants to do, but also recognize that she's strong in science and math, and that certainly is a pathway for her.
Thank you, Scott. Ben Mayer?
Hi, my name is Ben Mayer, and I'm honored to be here with you all this afternoon. I'm a middle school science teacher here in Fort Collins with a passion for making science relatable and fun and offering learning opportunities outside the classroom, from coaching sports and running field trips and other school events. I committed to being on this panel because it's mainly women who've inspired me to pursue and stick with teaching. And as a teacher, I believe that in working together and building on all of our expertise and hearing all of our voices, that we can and we will build a much better world.
Thank you, Ben. And Mike Kohler.
Thank you. It's interesting how many are proud CSU alums. I'm not, but like the sticker that I've seen at Vern's place when I go out there, not a native, but I got here as fast as I could. So what I do for the Larimer County Economic and Workforce Development Department, I am the coordinator of a leadership training program that serves businesses throughout the region. So I'm not confined by Larimer County borders. So all Northern Colorado businesses. I also teach in graduate programs for, forgive me, Rams, Purdue University and West Virginia University. in strategic communications. In both of those, I teach what has been the most popular elective in both programs, and that is organizational culture and communications, with a heavy emphasis on inclusion. So at the risk of aggravating our moderator, I'll steal the mic for a moment to say my special motivation for being here, it's all in the audience today, because there is what I see in my teaching and in my day job is that this audience in particular has an imperative. Now that you're here, now that you showed up, how you show up is a big darn deal. Because one thing we emphasize in the courses I teach and in the training I do is showing up is half the battle, but how you show up to everyone else. Now that we're gathered like this, the things we hear and that we learn today, it is incumbent upon all of us to go out and evangelize this, not just keep it to ourselves. And the reason I mentioned this audience in particular, I'm part of a generation, I really appreciated that panel before lunch that talked about ageism a little, because I'm from a generation that once upon a time, I showed up and stood up for important things like civil rights and women's rights and made monumental gains back then. And since then, there's been some progress, but we got fooled when Barack Obama was elected president because we thought, hey, we won, we must be there, right? Not right, but we kind of fell asleep and have slipped back. Now, though, what encourages me in this first 5-generation workforce that I serve every day is that the younger people, their voices are being heard, they will continue to be heard, and women in particular, because I am skeptical and cynical about politics getting to the solutions we need, that I believe business and science and the intersection of those two with women as leaders will be pivotal. And but before I go to the home eventually, I expect to see women leading this country in a whole new way that will be good for us all. I'll probably never get the mic back, but at least I got to say that part. So come on, everybody, step up. As you're hearing it here today, you go out and spread that.
Thank you, Mike. That was inspirational, and we'll probably come back to some of those points. So I appreciate you getting us fired up here. So as I mentioned, we're going to kind of do the flow of this with some discussion going on here with the panel, some questions we'll pose to them, and then we'll come to audience questions. So just a reminder, if you have something, pop it in the chat, and we'll come back to it in just a bit, or try and weave it in, whatever's the most appropriate for what we're talking about. So very intriguing to have a panel of men talk about women in science. And as I was thinking about these questions and reading the questions from our audience, I'm actually going to pose a question raised by somebody in elementary school who asked the basic question, what started this idea that men are superior? And I think Mike started us down this path a little bit, but there was a follow-up question to that. Why is the pace of change so glacial? So I want you to think about those two questions sort of fundamentally as we start to go along, and maybe start with the basic question of, from that foundation, why is the elevation of women in science important? Why do we need to be working on this? Why is it important that we're talking to men, to women, to everybody about this?
Lisa, do you want to go in any order, or?
No, I'd like you to just jump
Okay.
in, and if we get to too long of a pause, I'll call on somebody.
Right.
But go for it, Rick.
Well, actually, last night I was watching a Nova that premiered last week on PBS, and it's called Picture a Scientist, and that's all about women in science. And they posted some just eye-opening data. I mean, I know what my world looks like at the high school, but this data I saw on that documentary, and plus, please, everybody watch it. Picture a Scientist on Nova. They discussed how the numbers of women studying STEM have gone from 7% in 1970 to 29% in 2017. teen. And I just think that that growth trend is definitely not fast enough. And another piece of data that really surprised me was women in science and education. At the bachelor's degree level, it's 50-50. At the master's degree level, it's 44% women. At the PhD level, 41%. At the postdoc level, 36%. And employed, 29%. So we look at those trends and just think we have to reverse this. We have to analyze why so many women are dropping out of science, and see what we can change for the future. I have no answers, but just observations.
I'm curious about that. So we have people at all levels of education, the education sector here. We have teachers, we have professors. What are your thoughts about that? What do we do to reverse this trend?
I'll take that one, at least to start with, Lisa, and I'll just say, just in my time, again, I spent a lot of time in the middle school and now overseeing secondary. When I was a middle school principal, we did a lot of research as we were working on increasing the number of students experiencing STEM at my middle school, and particularly with a summer program. And we did a lot of work with CSU around how do we attract young girls to be a part of that program. And one of the distinct differences that we saw was that boys at that time were really engaged in tinkering, doing things with their hands, but not necessarily with an outcome. And young ladies were really focused on wanting to make a difference. And so when we were able to build programs where they could see themselves truly making their world a little better, they were far more engaged than when they were coming in and building a robot. They wanted to figure out what to do with the robot to make things, to make the world a little better. So I think making things relevant, helping all students, but particularly when we talk about girls, thinking about the work they're doing today at whatever point in life they are, truly makes the world, their community a little bit better, and letting it all be relevant and real is a good start.
Yeah, and I see that same thing in my middle school, teaching middle school for the past decade. And Dr. Shauna Leith mentioned this earlier in the day, the overlap between STEM and social issues, that being an important overlap where females really tend to thrive. And I see that echoed in my classroom from when we do debates where we try to make science more real and bring in the human element. I see females bringing a unique perspective that is more empathetic and more looks at the people part of the picture. And it's a missing perspective that I think is very important, especially these days. So.
Lisa, I'll weigh in. My first career, Manel, was in higher education, primarily college admissions. I worked for 3 or 4 private universities, including the University of Denver. And then I went on to the Daniels Fund. The greater challenge isn't that I found young women who want to go into science, it's men who prevent them. When we would go to high schools and say, we've got a full ride scholarship, can you send me a list of candidates? The number of men that were on that list, I'm asking, where are the women? When we're going into communities and saying we have a program that we want to bring summer scholars or science scholars, the number of men that would put it on that list. There's no shortage of women who wanted to do it. It's men who had a perception of who they want to promote through the pipeline. So part of this is why we're encouraging young women to get involved and move away from the perceptions of science as this marvelous thing that they can't do, but get men out of the way and ask for that list. This is the rule that when we talk to man on man is we have to assist with the ally work in those small conversations, not just in the big conferences.
I think that's getting at one of the important issues about attrition over time, even for women who decide they want to go down the road of being in science. And this addresses a little bit the comment that Vanessa made in the chat. And, you know, I think a fundamental piece of this is equity. So equal pay, equal opportunity, equal representation and recognition. And we just have to pay attention about that at every step, in every opportunity that we have. And like you say, whether we're looking at opportunities for scholarships or internships or committee composition in any of these things, but also understanding the unique challenges women face and not penalizing for those. And I think especially during this pandemic, we've seen abundant examples of women dealing with the impact of the pandemic and it negatively affecting careers. And so how do we accommodate that effectively?
Yeah, I just might take this to why we would want to do this. What is in it for the world if we do this? Because we go to, say, PhD scientists, and I guess my experience is women have a valuable, different way of approaching problems, of doing the work of science as well. They have a greater, I think, sense of precision, control, confirmation. They have a better sense of sustainability of things at the broader issue that I think we men don't always extend that far. I think that amplifies what somebody just said. Then I guess I'd throw into that they have a greater sense of introspection and a sense of humor in a lot of ways that I think is really enriching. So I think all this stuff will really make a better world. I think we'll make better collective decisions and with more inclusivity. And I think, again, if we refer to the pandemic, you could look at the countries in which were led by women and how they handled the pandemic. I think there's a practical example there.
Well, I heard some really intriguing things that I'm going to try and ask you to follow up with a little more depth on. And it ranges from conversations about, the pathway people are on. I guess maybe that's a structure we could follow for a little bit. So pathways that women are on by getting them introduced to science and opportunities for that. But then the various barriers that come along and challenges that start to take away from retention of women in science and start to lead to some of the statistics that just seem pervasively long over that 50-year period or crazy amount of time that we're thinking about. We haven't moved the needle that much. So reflecting kind of on your journey as men on this and thinking about supporting women, where's been the aha moment that this is something super intentional I need to pay attention to? It's so critical to our world. It's so critical to what we do that I need to be thinking about this intentionally, thinking about, and what are some of those intentional things? Gregg mentioned committees. We talked about scholarships. So what are some of those things that once you've had that moment that you've done to promote women?
I'll start if nobody minds.
Yep.
So I think it's just so key and important for educators at the middle school level and high school level to start providing those young women with female role models that are still in science and bringing in guest speakers and bringing and conducting activities. We're lucky at our high school, I'm talking about 3 women specifically. One of our science teachers, Josanne Lucas, she runs what we have, which is called the Bioscience Career Academy, where students take a rigorous science pathway, and they are endorsed with a BCA endorsement on their diploma. And it so happens that Bioscience Career Academy is 80% young women. So overwhelmingly female. And Josanne Lucas, who runs it, she is from Trinidad and Tobago, and she's a graduate in biomedical science from Auburn University, where she was a hurdler and part of Auburn's only national championship in track and field. And then she went on to become a 2-time Olympian and then ran a pretty elite career as a hurdler for Adidas for many years. And now we're so lucky to have her at our school, not only a woman in science, but an athlete and a woman of color. It's just fantastic. And then two other women that come to mind. The first is Michelle Lucas, and I think she's actually one of the guests or one of the people on here today. She runs a nonprofit called Higher Orbits, which conducts an activity called Go for Launch, which is a 2 or 3 day program at high schools where students compete in teams with an astronaut and various aerospace professionals to design an experiment to go on the International Space Station. And if they win at the high school, they go on to one more regional level. And if they win there, their experiment actually gets built by NASA and sent up to the International Space Station. So Michelle is doing a wonderful job. We've hosted 2 of them at Fort Collins High School, had our 3rd one going last year, but the pandemic closed us down. And we're going to plan it for this next year. But the other piece of that is that our alumni astronaut, her name is Dottie Metcalf Lindenberger. She's a 93 graduate. She was a high school middle teacher, and a kid asked her once, how do people go to the bathroom on the space shuttle? And so she got on a NASA website and saw that NASA was looking for people in teaching careers to become astronauts. And she applied for the program, and 2 years later, she became an astronaut and flew on STS-131, spent over a week on the International Space Station. And she comes back to our school often and works with these kids one-on-one for 2 or 3 days, designing these experiments. And to see the eyes of these young women light up when they get to meet a female astronaut who's been in space and they can picture themselves in that place. So I'll stop there. Sorry, I went on long, but just the role models and giving the kids opportunities to see successful women in science.
Great.
Speaking of that modeling, for me, because I'm seeing Ashley's comment in chat about being supportive, patient, and understanding with all students, but especially female students in STEM, because if, and I don't know the research behind this, but if men are more impatient about things and more, all those descriptors that go, that apply to men about bold, decisive, and yet when women do them, the same kind of behaviors, oh, that's treated a different way. But Ashley, I remember the best boss I ever had professionally in my history. I've served CEOs in a high level capacity. Best boss I ever had, not surprisingly, was a woman who, and I'm not really from the pure STEM science world, but this particular person had been our CFO. That is, she had a scientific mind, very analytical, right? And when she rose to unexpectedly to the CEO role that I had the pleasure of serving her in, it was thought that she might impose a heavy efficiency, bean counter mentality to things. And she proved to have the most human relations focused overall agenda. The workplace thrived because of her balanced approach to, hey, I need factual data. I need evidence-based decision-making, but keeping people in mind and a strong empathetic role that she had. And so I just thought she was a tremendous model. And so under her leadership, I didn't realize what a good thing I was doing. I thought it was the right thing to do. I was in a major market. One of my groups that reported to me was a TV production outfit, and that tends to be a men-dominated thing. And when I appointed as our production manager, the first woman in the market to produce major college sports, I was doing it because she was awesome and didn't realize what a breakthrough thing it was. And so, you know, every incremental thing we can do to just chip away, and let women bust through in new roles that break the stupid old paradigms that have ruled this society for way too long.
Great, Mike. And I'd love to add, and I think to both what Mike and Rick said, one, there's another, the idea of mentorship and how do you allow young ladies to see somebody that's beyond, but close enough where they can see themselves in that role. And I think Heidi Olinger's on this call, or certainly was on earlier today. She runs a program called Pretty Brainy in town that does just that, right? Where she brings in young innovators and allows them to innovate, create some solution for a problem, but partners them with someone that's in the next segment of life. So a high school student would be partnered or mentored up with a college student. A college student might be partnered or mentored up with someone that's early in their career. And so again, you get to see a pathway there. But the comment about the feedback is critical. When I think about just my own kids, how my son responds to feedback and how my daughter responds to feedback, and what we do in schools. And when you think about science and the sciences, largely any of us that went through science work, you fail to learn. And yet often we give feedback about not getting it or getting it quickly or getting it first is somehow a negative, and can be that's the case even as they move through STEM fields, as opposed to they're all learning opportunities. And how do we allow for learning forward and pick up on assets rather than deficiencies? And deficiencies aren't very motivational, don't want people to stick around. So how do we think about our feedback as a way to motivate individuals, as a way, as this question or statement says, demotivates individuals and pushes them away from where we would like them to be, or possibly where there's a capacity to have all they need is the spark or the opportunity for the spark to grow.
So let me follow.
You asked once about when would that aha moment. I remember when I was working for a small liberal arts college in the middle of Indiana, and we saw this significant drop during the recession with applications, and we're trying to figure out why. And we were talking to this community, and they said it's easy. In some communities, when the economy goes bad, we've got two choices: send our son to college or send our daughter to college. And I was listening to these people who were, as professionals, accepting this as a must. So the mindset was, well, we have to pay for one, let's send our son because our daughter can get married. I'm like, who's believing this myth? So when we're going into schools, why are you going, well, I don't expect to see young ladies because it's a bad economy. Go to the source. Are we talking to parents? When you go to a school, and this is narrow to admissions, I'm going to talk to women's basketball coach. I'm going to go where the young women are. They're not shocked. It's us as men who are like, when you hear that there's a young lady who's going to go into the science, it's almost like this wow, remarkable moment. Acknowledge the history of what women have done, but don't be surprised that there are women who want to go in this field. We almost go fall over ourselves like, wow, it's unbelievable. She actually wants to go into the sciences when we have been the biggest barrier, not them. I'm thinking of my twin sister, which said she was in one of her senior engineering courses at CU. And certainly the only Black female, but she was one of the few female in the classroom. Professor said, it's a spring day, why don't you guys take the day off? And being who she was, she goes, I'm paying X amount for this class. And so technically you don't give me the day off, I give you the day off. When do I get my class back? The number of young men who were angry at her and the professor allowed that, as opposed to, here's someone who wants to own their education. That should have been that number of professors' moment to say, this is what we're here for. The rest of you, let's get back to business. That's where we have a mindset of how do we correct the men's perception, not the young women, not the women who go into the sciences.
Great, thank you, Morris. Let's maybe go a little farther down this path and think about how people show up in space. And so I'm going to try and summarize in one question a number of different comments that were submitted ahead of time related to the activities, the behaviors, the thoughts, the supports that you provide as leaders for people that are uncomfortable in space. So If women are unsure of their progress, unsure of their talent, and are quiet and hesitant, have you noticed that? How have you reached out? You talked a little bit about the different ways that people take feedback. How have you adapted the way you give feedback to be encouraging to women? And one last sort of frame on this question is, I think, rooted in what we know about power, right? And so the question was framed in the way of, women are held to such perfectionist standards because they're expected not to succeed further. Men can take feedback, can try and fail, and it's not as big a deal. How do we support women having a little more comfort with failure and not being so hung up on perfectionists and proving that they have to do it? So I don't know if somebody wants to take this. Gilbert, you talked a little bit earlier about the Navajo reverence of empowerment of women. Maybe you might want to start this one.
Sure, I'd be happy to. One thing that comes to mind is, thinking about some of the women that came through my laboratory as undergrad researchers or as graduate students. I recall there was a lot of times where they would share with me their understanding of a lot of the discrimination and the bias that they've heard happens in the STEM field. And so, when it comes down to presenting in front of their committee, or whether it's a presentation at a conference, that I always tried to assure them and provided lots of encouragement, but also some practical things too, just practicing, saying, I know you don't consider yourself a strong public speaker, for example, it just requires practice. And so just giving that opportunity and really thinking about, when I raised my two girls as far as their success, just thinking about what they needed to hear in order to get that encouragement to think about the challenges that are out there in this world, whether it's STEM or any other profession, is that I think that's the key behind any man, is to be able to understand that. And that's difficult for men. And I think maybe for me, the advantage is it's in my culture. I'm the only man in my family, so I'm outvoted in a lot of ways. So I've learned over 50 plus years of my life on this earth to understand women. So that's something that not every man has an opportunity to do. So it's really easy to say, well, I support women, but then if there's no action, or if the sense is that you're not really committed to it, and I think that becomes obvious too, and that's really difficult for them to deal with as well. So, but I think that if you don't have that time to sort of become part of understanding, what women really think about, then I think there's a lot of opportunities for professional development. There's a lot of opportunities as leaders to give women that opportunity and to encourage them to do it, and to really make it meaningful in terms of actually making that decision to give a woman that opportunity. I think that's the key. It goes far beyond just saying, well, I support women, but then if there's no action, then that falls short. And that's an example. And that's what I hear a lot of women say, particularly at the level of higher education, is that we've got a lot of women in vet med, but it's and as far as faculty as well. But then when it gets to the leadership positions, it becomes a little bit more challenging. And then there's lots of reasons that happen, but I think that's one thing that I hope to make a change with the little time I have before I retire, to be able to make that impact as well. So that's at least what comes to mind at the moment.
Gilbert, thank you. You raised such an important point. Well, you had so much food for thought there, so I appreciate all the examples and thoughts. But one thing that you raised is something that I've seen pop up now a little bit in the chat, and certainly has been in other conversations, and that's about accountability. So I think it's Easy to talk the talk, much harder to walk the walk. So what are the ways that you as leaders, as men, as allies, as advocates are holding yourselves and others accountable to support women? Let's pick up that thread a little bit.
If I can, I'll give one because it just recently happened. I had the opportunity, well, before COVID, had the opportunity to go to an event that had significant number of men with titles, vice presidents, and some was around aerospace, some was around healthcare. And I was sitting close to where the head table was. The gentleman behind who was leading the meeting had a big title with a big company. And I watched an African-American woman walk into the room with her suit like everyone else had on, her pad that she had on. She had a coffee mug in her hand, and he looked at her and he says, "Oh, that reminds me, we're out of coffee." Room full of men, and he asked her, and she looked back and she said, "Well, it's a good thing I brought mine," and went and sat down. I said, and I had her sit right next to me at the front, 2 seats away from that gentleman. It was my responsibility before the end of that meeting to let him know what he did was completely out of line and wrong, as opposed to hoping no one paid attention to it. And she should have to pay the price by sitting there uncomfortably. She sent me an email later on that he emailed her the next day saying, "My apologies, but in future meetings when they saw each other," she said he never really acknowledged her again. So I think that sometimes we want to let things pass because it's uncomfortable for us. But men know when something's been passed. We know when it's our chance to really correct something. And that small moment can have a ripple effect. Imagine that vice president going back to his company now thinking differently about his behavior when he's engaged with people, not only just women, but people of color in non-traditional roles and titles, and how they think about their small actions moving forward.
Mike, what a powerful story, and it's all around us, right? I mean, I think about even I talked earlier, I have a 7th grade daughter, wonderful grandparents, but periodically I'll hear him say to the 3 boy grandchildren, "You guys should check out this," call it Rick's Nova thing. And they'll send it for my son and 2 other nephews, and they won't invite my daughter to the table to do that. And you got to speak to it, right? And so the uncomfortable conversations in the family, in the situation Mike does, bravo, Mike, for having that conversation, because that's what we have to do, right? We have to step into it and engage and really try to understand. How I use the word, help me understand a lot around things that feel wrong to me. Not that I'm right all the time, but these kind of things jump out at you, but they're all around us.
You know, Laura makes a great point in the chat that relates to the last few observations that have just been shared. That the that action allyship. I was just in a session last night about allyship. That it's more than just giving the blessing or the approval. My pet peeve word that I learned in my undergrad work in cultural anthropology in a multicultural program, the word tolerance. Because tolerance suggests that we're in a position to judge. And when I hear somebody say, "Oh, well, about that gay thing or that race thing or whatever, that I'm tolerant, who put you in charge?" And so I say that action is what represents allyship, is do something. And so Morris, that great example you showed, kudos to you, because that's what you got to do. And it takes a lot of little and big things to get that done.
How do we think about that across, the range of education we're sitting in today, from elementary school through postdocs and into faculty and senior faculty? How do we train allies? How do we teach young men, young men to appreciate diversity, to empower women, to support women, to support women of color? How do we teach this?
I'll pipe in a little bit. At the high school level, you can always hear things in class at any moment and have those teachable moments. And for me, and Ben would probably agree, it's really hard to hit those teachable moments with any strength and talk about the actions without having solid relationships with the students, so that you can bring up a more uncomfortable subject and know you're not singling anybody out. And for me, it's all about building relationships and having that trust in your classroom. And that allows people to open up their minds a little bit.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, adding on to that is I think finding those moments, and like Morris earlier, finding that moment where you can, whether it's an executive at a big company, like you said, or a middle schooler in my class, when we hear those moments, and like Rick said, if you have the relationship with the kid in the classroom, then you can work through that process and demonstrate, here's how I approach that and think through that, and knowing that I, as a teacher, I don't know all the answers, and I'm learning as well. But at least, recognizing something's wrong or it feels uncomfortable, and then thinking through that process of how to make this better and how to improve, our relationship and move on, is important. Especially, I think, with middle schoolers, they're at this stage where they're learning that and how to operate in society and what they like, what they enjoy doing, and what they're interested in.
Okay. Gregg, Ed, Gilbert, any thoughts from the Academy?
So I would say I think it's important, obviously, for girls to see role models, see themselves in different positions. It's also important for boys to see women in those positions. And so they benefit from that. And then to extend that even further, we have an opportunity to organize mentoring relationships. That's fundamental to what we do in academia at every level, really. So ensuring that men have as part of their mentoring group women. And I think that can be very impactful.
Yeah, agree with all that, both ways. And the thing I try never to forget is when you're in a group to always ask everyone what their opinion is or what their input is. You see that most commonly in adult groups, but I think it applies very much. Always ask everyone. If you just ask, sometimes that will help women or girls, and sometimes men. Sure, some of us don't talk a lot, but it's nice to be asked. What do you think? You have something worth contributing. I know you do. And sometimes that makes a huge difference in things like committee meetings. But we're all in a committee all the time. So.
And Ed, to add to that, Ashley's earlier question, when you ask, what do you think? And allowing a pause to let people think.
I wonder on the accountability side, are we allowing are we rewarding institutions that take the risk, or departments, or I think about True Leadership, and particularly university, when we saw a number of African-American female candidates come through and they didn't make it past the first interview stage. And at one point, the president worked with the dean and said, if we don't see a significant increase in those who make it to the interview stage, not just the applicant stage, not only will we cancel that search, we'll move that position to another department. That mentality saw a shift of literally hiring 3 to 5 African-American women in the next 3 to 4 years. So reward the department that's making that effort, reward the professor that's really taking a risk on putting together a program, although it's gonna fail, maybe it failed forward because it put something on the front line. The accountability, we know what happens. It's budget, it's line items, it's titles. If we're not seeing real change in that, that's where the accountability happens, when people have to lose something if they don't take the risk to do something.
I appreciate that comment, Morris, so much in thinking about systemic issues that we have to address Otherwise, we're going to be having this conversation. Our kids are going to be having this conversation, and their kids are going to be having this conversation. So let me switch a little bit to pick up an audience question that's in line with this. And there was a question related to strategies and breaking it down into an allyship strategy, mentoring, working with women, and then an advocacy question or strategy. It could be what you were just talking about, systemic advocacy. It could be talking one-on-one to other men. What are your thoughts about both those strategies? Is one more important than the other? Do we need both? How do we equip people with skills for both? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I believe in teaching inclusion as a leadership skill, and per the last comment that was just offered, reward good behaviors when you see them. Try and measure it as best you can, but again, acknowledge or reward those people. And I believe that leaders, by the way, I do not talk about people highest up with the highest titles, but people who demonstrate leadership from inside the organization at whatever level they're at. When they're showing those right behaviors, spot it and praise it and just keep that momentum going. So again, inclusion I see as a skill that we can all work on and strengthen and share it with others.
Okay, let's move on a little bit. I want to get another question in here from the audience, and wanted to follow up on the idea of scenarios, words, and so on that have an impact on confidence and the way that people move through the world. So what are your ideas? How do you think about inspiring women to be advocates and allies for themselves, as well as men to be advocates and allies for them? What strategies have you used to support?
I will
women?
leave with one that I use both not only for women, but for young people of color, people LGBTQ movement. I call it go into the fray. When I ran the Congresswoman's office, I would keep track of my calendar, how many times I was the only African-American man in the room, on a policy room. And it was something like 80% of removing the elected officials. And I recognize that in that room, they're gonna make a decision that impacts me or the community I care about. So I'd rather be in the room than be and even if I'm uncomfortable. So I remind the young people, go into the room. If you're gonna be the only woman, be prepared, go into the room. Be prepared, sit at the front. Do the little things that we know, but my responsibility is to take someone with me. If I have that title, I've been invited, there's access. There's my network, putting it to good use. So let me bring someone in the room who they're not expecting. Let's make sure they have a role to speak. And empowering them to say, you made a difference in this meeting just by being present. And I think there's small things that so many of us in this room get invited to, where we can move that needle just by who we bring with us and sit next to us and who we offer to speak, as opposed to us being our own vocal allies.
Thank you, Morris. Other ideas from the panel? Manel. Well, I'm going to ask us to do a round robin here, and we have a few minutes left, and then we need to start transitioning in about 5 or so minutes to our next event. But as we start to think about this, what's our imperative for right now? What would you say to our audience that we cannot fail going forward? What is our most important thing that we need to accomplish? What's our imperative? Where do we go?
I'll just start out. The reason I emphasize the inclusion thing is that in addition to fight for yourself and others, I think it's generally regarded that women are more other-centric, that is not just self-centric. Keep going that way, because I like to reorder the DE&I acronym to start with inclusion, which is a skill that leads to discovering diversity, diversity of thought and diversity of life experience. So just as you were advised to show up and be present, be actively present in the awareness of including others, not just sticking up for yourself.
I always think about inclusivity as something that will, it's not something that is an affirmative action for the person being included. It is something that will make the outcome better. Again, it will make our decisions better. They'll be balanced. This is something that is an action for all. So I think I'd like to see it taken out of the context of we are doing this as a balancing. We are, but it is to make things better. I think that's a really big deal that often gets sort of overlooked. That's why there are a mix of, there's inclusivity in a committee and anything in the world should be. So.
Thank you, Ed. What are we going to not fail so we don't have this conversation 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, bringing everyone's voice to the table creates better solutions to the problems we face, and they're more resilient and you know, they're more sustainable. And so we need to get, you know, everyone's perspective when we're looking for these solutions to these issues we're facing. And now, I think more than ever nowadays, I think, you know, there's a tenuous relationship with science for a lot of folks out there, in, like was mentioned earlier, connecting, if you're seeing more people of more diverse people speaking these scientific truths, or just being involved in the process, I think we're more likely to involve more people in the scientific process and better our world that way. But mainly, I think just getting a diversity of viewpoints will create better solutions. We need everyone for that.
Gilbert, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, my brain always thinks real simple, you know, and you think about, you know, this world, you think about humanity. I mean, we're made up of women, we're made up of men. And to me, just for making sense, it makes no sense to have organizations, groups in which you look out in the audience and it's one-sided, particularly if it's all male or mostly men. And so, you know, I look at our profession right now, you know, it's getting better, but things that sort of are glaring, obvious places that I at least mention to women when we talk about these things are boards of director groups. You know, we have those in our college. They're being developed, and a lot of times there is a single woman in that group, and that's really one of the unfortunate things that happens, because a lot of the times those are the top leadership groups that ultimately dictate directions of you know, everything, at least within academia. So you know, if given that opportunity, be part of it. As somebody said, you know, even if you're the only woman, go for it, you know, and take somebody with you if you need to, or give advice, but don't walk away from that chance.
Great. Scott, any thoughts about this?
Well,
Imperative.
I like what others have said. I think we have lots of opportunity or challenges ahead of us, and the richer the inputs, the better the outcomes. And I think Ed said it well in saying, you get all the voices involved, you get an inclusive set of voices, the outcomes are better and richer. So that would be what I'd say.
Rick or Greg, any final words? And then I have a final question for Morris, a quick one, but we're getting very much to the end. So quick.
Sure, I'll
thought?
pipe in real quick. For me, you know, and my position in the high school, I've just got to continue with support and motivation, being present, you know, showing the young women examples of what they can be and that they can be successful. And a lot of times it's just squashing doubts they might have. Oh, I'm not really smart enough. I can't do this. And just, you know, being able to get in there and put an end to those things as early as possible.
Hey, and just real quickly, I'd like to add that there's all these things we can do as individuals. I think that's obviously critically important, but we also have institutionalized discrimination and bias, and we have to address that. And those are big barriers. Those are really challenging, and will take all of us to break down those barriers.
Thank you. And Morris, send us on our way with one piece of advice for our next steps.
The goal of diversity, inclusion, and equity is not those three, it's belonging. You can be in a diverse room, it can be inclusive, you can feel like the room looks good, but in the end, everyone's feel like they belong. Not that they're part of a mix, not just that they were invited, not just the music and the party is what they want to feel like they belong. And most of this is not about anything else, but I think about the teachers. If a year ago we just said, make sure every student in our school has a tablet or a tool, what would we have said? How are we gonna pay for it? Let's do a focus group. Let's do a round robin. How are we gonna analyze it? Most school systems did it within a month, which means what? This was not about a lack of resource, it was a lack of will. So what else are we using as an excuse that we don't have the resources to change as opposed to the will to change? None of this is groundbreaking. Enough bright people in the room, we know how to make this happen. We just want to hide behind the numbers, the statistics, the dollars, the change, the process. It's going to happen inevitably. Look at the 1980s, the number of kids of color were going to go to college, and we actually like, what's going to happen when that happened? It happened. And we have a generation now that has no tolerance or patience for our process. They've clearly shown if we don't make the change, they're going to do it for us. So at this point, we just either do it or get out of the way.
What a perfect way to end our wonderful Manel. I want to, on behalf of, oh my gosh, so many people, thank you for just being so vulnerable, so open, so helpful, so thoughtful. A really great conversation this past hour. And to the audience, thank you so much for participating. I just wish you inspiration, advocacy, and let's go make a difference. Let's not have this conversation in a decade. Let's go. So thank you all. I think now, I just want to make sure I'm doing this right, that we will go back to the other room.
Yes.
So
the
yes.
Zoom link currently is in the chat. So you would click that link to go back to the main meeting. So after everybody's thanks, thank you.
I love seeing all of you people together. This is great. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Hey, Morris, are you gone yet? Well, I'll catch up with him later. That was awesome.
Thank you all so much.
He's shielded. So we'll just wait until everybody goes over.